Good afternoon. I'm Rory Fitzgerald, Director of the European Social Survey, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our event celebrating 20 years of the European Social Survey, specifically focused on time series analysis. I'd like to acknowledge the support of the European Commission from the ESS Sustain 2 grant, which has helped to support this event. We have a really interesting programme of speakers today who are joining us, looking at data from across the ESS time series. Most recently, we've just released the final set of data from our 10th round to our data users, so that's available for download. Without further ado, we'll move to our first speaker. Before we do, just to say you can put questions for the speakers into the Q&A, and we'll cover those at the end of this afternoon's workshop. And there will be a recording of the workshop made available afterwards from our YouTube channel. So first of all, I'd like to pass over to Ivan Petrúšek, doctoral candidate in sociology and a junior researcher at the Institute of Sociology of the Czech Academy of Sciences. So Ivan, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and once again, thank you, Rory, for introducing me. In my talk, I'm going to discuss published research concerning support for income redistribution in 18 European countries during the first 2 decades of the third millennium. In other words, I will present the aggregate attitude trends in whether residents of European countries agree that their respective governments should reduce income inequality via taxes and social transfers. Welfare regimes will frame my presentation as these trends in redistribution support will be presented in 5 welfare regime types. And I've noticed that I didn't share my screen, so can you see my presentation now?
We can see that now. Thank you.
Okay, sorry for that. So as suggested, this presentation is based on an article that Aleš Kudrnáč and I wrote for the Polls Trends section of the Public Opinion Quarterly Journal. The open access article titled Welfare Regimes and Support for Income Redistribution in Europe was published at the end of last year. Data, scripts, and documentation are available on the Harvard Dataverse. In other words, everything that I'm going to present here is fully reproducible. So in my talk, I will be pursuing 3 goals. Firstly, because of the Great Recession, 2015 migrant crisis, and the increase in income inequality, which we saw in most European countries over the past 20 to 30 years, all these trends may have affected the public support for income redistribution. And because of this, I will present the general trends in redistribution support in Europe between the years 2002 and 2009. So the first goal is rather descriptive, just following the trends. Secondly, our article studies if and how country-level aggregate attitudes towards income redistribution vary between welfare regimes. The welfare state regime, which was this concept, which was initially introduced by Esping Andersen in 1990, represents, broadly speaking, social policy configurations and ideologies that justify the adopted social policies. These particular configurations or configurations of relationships between the market, the state, and family should create differences in levels of support for welfare state policies, such as the income redistribution. Hence, our paper studies the so-called regime hypothesis, which postulates the association between welfare regime types and the aggregate public attitudes. And the third goal of our paper is to analyze the relationship between support for income redistribution and household income, both across time and across welfare regimes. Theories of welfare state, of welfare attitudes, which are centered on the economic self-interest of the individual, such as the medium voter hypothesis or the theory of Homo economicus. All these theories predict a negative association between income and redistribution support. In other words, high income people, because they are usually net contributors to income redistribution policies, will tend to oppose redistribution, whereas low income people, as net beneficiaries of redistributive policies, will tend to support redistribution because it's in their material interest to support it. So let's proceed with the supposed relationship between welfare regimes and the aggregate support for income redistribution. Welfare regime theory argues that welfare regimes both produce and reproduce their own legitimacy. The regime hypothesis consequently postulates that welfare regime impacts residents' beliefs about distributive justice and how much of income redistribution by the government is legitimate or generally appropriate. The regime hypothesis proposes ordering of welfare regime types based on the aggregate levels of redistribution supports. In other words, it suggests which welfare regime should have the highest redistribution support and which regime should have the lowest redistribution support. In my presentation, I will distinguish between 5 welfare regime types. So the first one is social democratic, which is exemplified by the Nordic countries. This regime is defined by comprehensive social policy, which covers most of the social risks. The state is the main provider of social security. Social benefits are universal and generous within the social democratic regime. Equality represents the dominant principle of distributive justice, and these countries are characterized by high levels of public social spending and resulting low levels of disposable income inequality. The regime hypothesis suggests that support for income redistribution should be highest in the social democratic regime because these regimes socialize people to have their preferences in line with the goals of this regime. So the second welfare regime, as defined by Esping Andersen, is the conservative. Social insurance and the family are the primary sources of social security in this regime. Benefits are often tied to previous earnings or contributions to the system. Thus, benefits are not universal here. The conservative regime emphasizes maintaining social status and the traditional family model of the male breadwinner. Equity represents the dominant principle of distributive justice, and the continental countries of the Western Europe belong to this regime. The regime hypothesis predicts that support for income redistribution will be lower in the conservative regime than in the social democratic, but at the same time higher than in the third regime defined by Esping Andersen, which is the liberal regime. So let's proceed with the third regime. Here, the market is primary provider of social security. The state, on the other hand, only plays a residual role in providing social security. The state provides targeted and means-tested benefits to individuals and families that are in need. Benefits are relatively low and provide only a minimum safety net. The need represents the basic principle of distributive justice in this regime. The regime hypothesis suggests, as I have already said, the lowest redistribution support in the liberal regime. In Europe, the United Kingdom and Ireland are examples of this welfare regime, while the archetypal example of this model are the United States of America. The fourth regime is the Mediterranean or Southern welfare regime. It is sometimes referred to as a subcategory of the conservative regime. However, in the Mediterranean regime, a stronger emphasis is placed on informal welfare provision via the family networks, since social protection is immature or rudimentary. As the name of this welfare regime suggests, Southern European countries such as Portugal, Spain, and Italy belong to this regime. The regime hypothesis suggests that there should be high levels of income redistribution support in countries with a Mediterranean welfare regime, since residents of these countries would like to have same or similar levels of social security, such as Western European and Nordic countries. However, there are still some competing justifications which suggest that redistribution support in this regime should be low. Lastly, we have the residual category, which is the post-communist regime. This welfare regime type emerged in Eastern European countries after they transitioned from the centrally planned communist economies to more market-oriented economies. Post-communist welfare regime often lacks a comprehensive and coherent social protection system. The regime hypothesis actually does not formulate any predictions concerning support for income redistribution and attitudes towards welfare policies for the residents of these countries. So, in my presentation, I will be using the first 9 rounds of the European Social Survey. I'm only working with 18 countries that fielded at least 8 rounds. I measure support for income redistribution with the level of agreement with the following statement that the government should take measures to reduce differences in income levels. Well, this standard European Social Survey questionnaire item is quite often used in comparative research, which studies attitudes towards income redistribution. Well, some disputes exist whether the items measures the relative or absolute support for income redistribution, put differently, whether respondents support or oppose change from the current state of redistributive policies, in other words, their relative redistribution support, or alternatively, whether when respondents are faced with this item, whether they think more of the general government redistributive policies should exist. This would hint at the absolute support of income redistribution. Anyway, since it's beyond the scope of our paper to maybe measure these different variants of redistribution support, we don't distinguish between them, between these two interpretations, and only use this item to tap the general support for income redistribution. In all the outputs that I will present, on the following slides the percentage of respondents who either agree with the statement will always be plotted on the vertical axis of the plots. So let's have a look at the results. So this figure presents the average support for income redistribution in Europe grouped by the welfare regimes. In general, we can see that the aggregate support has been or was quite stable during the study period, maybe with some increases after the round 3, with the exception of the post-communist countries where there was actually a drop. What is surprising is that against the predictions of the regime theory or regime hypothesis, the social democratic regime has the lowest aggregate support for income redistribution, whereas the Mediterranean regime has the highest aggregate support. But anyway, this was suggested by some of the authors. The conservative and liberal regime on average have very, very similar levels of aggregate level of income redistribution. So this figure basically splits or presents aggregate support for income redistribution within European countries over time, and these countries are grouped by the welfare regimes. I would say that the most general finding is that in most of these countries, the aggregate support for income redistribution was relatively stable. Czech Republic and Estonia, with their quite fluctuating support, were exceptions to this general tendency. Furthermore, we also observe a gradual increase in support for income redistribution in Germany, which started somewhere around 55% up to almost 75% in the 9th ESS round. Furthermore, we can see that the levels of aggregate redistribution support vary among countries within some welfare regimes more than in the other. Obviously, these welfare regimes, which only include 2 countries, they are quite homogeneous. Denmark represents a really strong outlier within the social democratic regime with its very low redistribution support, which is actually the lowest out of all the analyzed European countries. Furthermore, Czech Republic represents a significant outlier within the post-communist regime because redistribution support is quite low in this country. Let's proceed with the relationship between support for income redistribution and household income. We have classified respondents into 3 groups based on the actual empiric quantiles. The 20% of households with the lowest incomes, in other words, the first quintile, are denoted here with the orange circles. Households between the 20th and 80th percentile represent the medium incomes, and these are denoted with black squares. And lastly, the 20% of households with the highest income, in other words, the 5th income quintile, are plotted here with the blue triangles and blue connected lines. These gray numbers in the figures represent the percentage point differences in redistribution support between the low income and high income groups. This indicator measures the overall strength of the relationship between income and redistribution support in each country. What can be immediately seen is that these results are in line with the theories based on self-interest. The highest support for income redistribution within the conservative regime countries is among low-income people and is highest and the lowest among the high-income people. What can be also seen is that the overall levels of support are very similar for the low-income and medium-income groups. Well, the size of the effect or the percentage point difference between low-income and high-income countries differs quite a lot within the conservative regimes. It is the highest in Netherlands and Switzerland, and lowest in Belgium and France. So this is what happens within the social democratic regime. Here again, the clear tendency of low-income people and middle-income people having very similar levels of redistribution support is obvious, and the high-income people have the lowest aggregate support for income redistribution. Similar results also for the liberal regime, the effect size being larger in United Kingdom. This is what happens in the Mediterranean countries or Mediterranean welfare regimes. Here, the results are not as clear-cut. Here, I would describe it to the ceiling effect. Since these countries, Spain and Portugal, are so pro-distributive, there is no that much space for differences between high and low income people. And lastly, this relationship for post-communist countries. Hungary represents a very similar case to Mediterranean countries. Overall, it has very high redistribution support and thus very low percentage points differences between the high and low income groups. However, in some countries, the effect size is actually quite big. For example, in Czech Republic and Poland. So to sum up, in most of the analyzed countries, the aggregate support for income redistribution was relatively stable. In other words, it seems that all these big events, such as the Great Depression, migrant crisis, and increase in income inequality may have had only small effects on the variations in aggregate support for income redistribution. There is substantive variation in average redistribution support among welfare regimes. However, this variation was not always in line with the regime hypothesis. The biggest or starkest exception was the case of the social democratic regime, which, according to this analysis, has the lowest aggregate level of redistribution support. This may suggest at the relatively high redistribution levels that are already in place in these countries, and maybe suggest that when people in these countries answer these questions, they interpret the question as measuring the relative support for redistribution. Still, there is substantive variation in support for income redistribution between countries within welfare regimes. This may be a result of problematic classification of countries to these ideal types. The strength of the association between income groups and redistribution support varies between countries and also within welfare regimes. This association was the strongest in the post-communist and social democratic regime. And what is also, I think, interesting is that the middle income residents tend to show similar level of redistribution support to that of low income residents in almost all countries, which suggests that the structure of inequality within these countries may not play that important role in general. Thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your possible questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan, for a fascinating presentation. If you do have questions for Ivan, please put them in the Q&A and note that they're for Ivan, and we'll come back to questions at the end of the presentations today. Thank you very much. So moving on now to Kristýna Bašná from the Czech Academy of Sciences, who's going to talk about contextual effects of unemployment on redistribution in Europe. Kristýna, over to you.
Thank you. So I'll share my presentation now. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see. You just need to put it into presenter mode.
Sure. Okay. Good.
Perfect.
Move.
That's right.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for introducing me. So actually this paper, I'm presenting a paper that it's almost finished, and it's not only me who wrote this paper, but it's also Ivan who was presenting just now. So actually the topic is a little bit similar. We focus on the welfare state, and we wrote this paper which is almost finished, and we are just now finalizing the just some comments we received, and we're going to send it to a journal, I think by the end of this month. So if you still will have some comments on our work, we would be happy to hear that. And also, Ivan, if you would have any comments on the presentation, you can always jump in and specify something. So the topic of our presentation is on contextual effects of employment on redistribution support in Europe. And so the aim of the paper is to understand unemployment's longitudinal and cross-sectional effects on pro-redistributive attitudes. We are looking at this topic because the empirical evidence of these effects is not consistent at all, basically due to methodological gaps. So we thought that this topic is really important. It would be very important to fill this gap in research and to understand the differences of the effect of unemployment to pro-redistributive attitudes, at the same time on cross-sectional data set and longitudinal, which thankfully to the ESS we can actually do now. So what we know so far is that micro-level attitudes that explain welfare state or the pro-redistributive attitudes are quite clear today. So at the individual level, we have theories that explain the attitudes from the material point of view. So this is something Ivan presented now. So it's that individual people tend to hold attitudes in accordance with their material self-interest. So it's connected to their income level, economic activity, gender, or age. And then we can have a second individual level effects, and that are predispositional approaches. Those are values, beliefs, or ideological dispositions that influence the attitudes towards the welfare state or distributional attitudes. But what we don't know so far, as I said before, are the effects of macro level attitudes. So the evidence is not conclusive. Usually the variables at the macro level that are used are GDP, income inequality, or unemployment. But the results differ very significantly. We did a literature review, and we actually found evidence of positive, negative, and also no relationship at all between these macro variables and the attitudes towards redistribution. And this is basically due to the studies using very much different methods regions, years. So some of them are case studies, focus only on one country. Others are trying to use more countries, but they're usually only cross-sectional. So what is actually missing is a robust longitudinal cross-sectional study. And we decided to focus on unemployment, as it is one of the most important variable on the individual level that influences the attitudes towards a redistribution. And in focus to unemployment, there are also a few theories that try to explain the relationship between unemployment and attitudes to the welfare state, or specifically to attitudes to the redistribution. And that's countercyclical theory and procyclical theory. So the first one says that the worsening economic situation at a country level leads to higher support for the welfare state. So that means that citizens would support pro-redistribution more when economic situation is worse, and conversely, they will be less supportive of income redistribution when economic periods are well, when there's lower unemployment, and when there's economic growth. Conversely, the procyclical theory says the opposite thing. So that means that when the economic situation is worsening, we have depression, that makes citizens less supportive of the welfare state. And actually for both of them, we have literature that actually did some analysis that supports these theories. So really the evidence on the macro level is not very clear. But what we know is that the cross-sectional evidence, so not taking into account different years, but only analyzing countries at one time point, points to positive relationship between higher unemployment rates and welfare state support, which means that when there's higher unemployment, when economics is not doing that well, then there will be higher support for income redistribution at the country level and at the individual level as well. Which is in line with the self-interest theory at the individual level, which I was talking about in the beginning. And so we believe that there should be rather this relationship, but we don't know what will happen if we take longitudinal data and understand and try to understand whether this would hold also when we analyze the data over decades or years. So that's what we will try to do, or we try to do in our paper. So we had three hypotheses. The first one focused on the cross-sectional relationship. So the first said that country average unemployment rates are positively associated with support for income redistribution. So that's only taking the cross-section level, not taking into account the longitudinal data. And that's something which we understood for previous literature that would probably be the case. But now moving to the longitudinal hypothesis. So in relation to cyclical and countercyclical theories, we have two sub-hypotheses. We think that the changes in unemployment rates at the country level might be positively or negatively related to redistribution support. So that's our main focus of this article, to see which way it will go if we use the ESS data spanning through 9 years. No, 9 years, 9 rounds. And the third hypothesis is focused on inequality, because from the previous literature, we found that actually income inequality is a really important predictor of the support for income redistribution. And we believe that this could actually be a cross-level interaction there. So we believe that being unemployment can positively affect redistribution support, but this effect could be smaller in higher inequality countries and also smaller in periods of higher income inequality. So we look at first cross-sectional levels, but also at the longitudinal levels. So now moving to the data. So as I said, we have individual level and country level data. So the individual level data, we use the ESS data. We use 9 ESS rounds spanning from 2002 till 2019. And we used 27 countries. So those are countries that took part in at least 4 ESS rounds, so that we can have some development in time. For the country level data, we use the OECD database and the SWIID database. For the outcome variable for the support for income redistribution, we use the ESS variable, the same that Ivan used in his other paper. So that is the question on whether government should take measures to reduce differences in income levels, and saying whether the respondent agrees or disagrees with this statement. We also use different contextual variables based on the theories that have already been used in the welfare state literature. So we use unemployment in individual and country level, subjective income, sex, age, education, satisfaction with the present state of economy in the country, left-right political ideology, GDP, and income inequality. Our modeling strategy used multi-level modeling. We have 3 levels. First level are individual respondents. We have more than 300,000 respondents. These are nested in country rounds, which is level 2. In total, we have 202 country rounds. And these 2 levels are nested in level 3, which is country. And so, as I said before, we have 27 countries. We use random intercepts and random slopes. For the individual level, those are the variables that I presented before. So it's gender, age, unemployment, subjective income, education, satisfaction with the present state of economy in a country, and left-right political ideology. And for the country level, we use unemployment, Gini coefficient, and public social expenditure. So for the results, we have this huge table. I even tried to shorten it a bit, but we have many larger tables in the annex. So just for you to see the results, we don't have. I didn't put here the results from the individual level, but those actually just confirm the previous findings. So at the individual level, there is no variability or no confusion. It's all clear. But at the country level, which is interesting to us, especially the employment one, we see that the employment at the individual level is actually really important. But at the country level, the results are not that consistent. Actually, the unemployment rate between country effects is significant. So that means that at the cross-sectional level, the relationship is important, which supports our first hypothesis and which is something we have expected. but the within country effect, so that's the longitudinal one, is not significant. So we can actually see that the hypothesis that there is a change in time that would connect unemployment levels to support for income redistribution is not supported. But we can see that the Gini coefficient is actually very important, and specifically when we do interaction between Gini coefficient and unemployment, we actually get significant results. So that is something that hasn't been analyzed before, and this is supporting our last hypothesis on the income inequality. Just to show you a bit the relations between, or the results on the longitudinal relationship and the cross-sectional relationships. These are very nice graphs that have been done by Ivan, from which is very clear that the cross-sectional relationship actually shows effects of unemployment rate on the redistribution support. But if you look at the longitudinal relationship, there is basically no relationship. So the effects in time are non-existent. We also tried to look at the different countries and see what is happening at each specific country. And we saw that the longitudinal effect of unemployment really varies among European countries. So some countries seem to align with the pro-cyclical argument, but in others, counter-cyclical argument is more important. And there is no theory or no grouping that would explain these differences very simply, in a simpler terms. So this is something that we should look more into to understand what is actually behind this. But what we also found that first, that individual and cross-sectional level, that we support previous findings, so they're robust. And we also found an important effect of income inequality, specifically on the interaction between income inequality and unemployment levels. We found that when inequality within countries is below its long-term levels, so that means that it's decreasing, being unemployed strongly affects redistribution support. So this is an important finding, showing that it's not a simply relationship between unemployment and support for income inequality, but income redistribution, but a factor of income inequality at the country level is extremely important and should be taken aboard when doing models focusing on these variables. So that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kristýna, for a fascinating paper. Again, just to remind people, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'll come back to questions at the end of today's seminar, but thank you very much for your presentation. Now we move on to José Pereira Coutinho from the Catholic University of Portugal, who's going to focus on youth religiosity in your home time. José, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rory. Thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you very much for the European Social Survey for the invitation, for the opportunity to present a very small presentation here. I'm going to try to be very simple in my presentation and try to be the most straightforward as possible. I'm going to share. Just a moment, please.
That's great. We can see that.
I can see it. Thank you. So I'm from Portugal, from the Universidade Católica Portuguesa, from the Catholic University of Portugal. I'm a sociologist of religion and youth. And so that is why the presentation, the aim of this presentation is to talk about the evolution between the first and the last wave, between 2002 and 2020, of the last wave of European Social Survey. And about, of course, about the youth religiosity in Europe. Let make me a very small theoretical framework. I don't know if all of you are aware, but when you talk about in sociology of religion, talk always about secularization, mostly in Europe, and a theory that came from the secularization, the theory of cohort replacement, is very important to explain the evolution of religiosity, namely in youth, among the last decades, meaning that less socialization over generations are turning that the lineage of belief, it's a term from Daniel Hervé-Léger, are becoming fewer over time. And it means that youth are increasingly less religious. At the same time, to compare countries, it's very important to be aware that modernity is not linear, is not one, but it's multiple. And so when you're talking about multi-modernities, we're talking about that each country has its own modernization path. So it means that in general, all countries are different, but some countries are more equal than others. So they can be grouped together. So the main idea is the theory of cohort replacement and the multiple modernities in terms of theoretical framework. In terms of methodology, I used 19 countries. Why? Because these 19 countries, they have all data from the first wave and the last wave, the 10th wave, and they can be grouped in types of religious tradition: Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, and mixed, Catholic and Protestant. And you can see the Catholic countries are they are much more than the others, much more. The variables, I use 3 variables. The first one is not I have to make a transformation from of C12 in 2020 and C10 2002. I have to make a transformation into a new variable, a dummy variable, where all the religious or denominations are yes and the non-religious are no. This is religious affiliation. The second one is the religious service attendance. I grouped this variable, where 1 are the categories from 1 to 3 that mean at least once a week, and the others, less, from 4 to 7, are less attendance. And finally, prayer is the same thing. It's because the categories of these 2 variables, they are the same, from 1 to 7, and they mean always the same. A very important thing here is that for both waves, the variables, the questions and the answers, or the categories, are always the same. This is very important to compare between waves, between rounds. And with these 3 variables, I produced an index where the Kronbach alpha is 0.679, is not very good, but is acceptable. Finally, weight. weight. I use the post-stratified design weight because analysis weight is only available from wave 9. So I have, comparing 2002 with 2020, I had to use this weight, and according to the instructions of the ESS, this weight gives the same results of the analysis weight. So let's look to the first variable indicator. We can see what? We can see that the first, the country with the highest level of religious affiliation is Greece, followed by Slovenia, Italy, and Poland, and Portugal, and so on. And the country with the lowest level is Czechia, followed by Netherlands, Sweden, United Kingdom, and Norway. What we can see that the highest numbers are in the only Orthodox country in this analysis, and Catholic countries, and the lowest values are in Czechia, a country with a Catholic tradition, but it's an outlier country, and Protestant or mixed countries. With red circle, we have the countries with the highest decrease between 2002 and 2020. And with a red arrow, we have the countries where there was an increase between 2002 and 2020. We can see that Sweden, Belgium, and Hungary, they have an increase, but it's not significant. Only Slovenia has an increase between 2002 and 2020. The studies, we can see here, the studies comparing with known studies, a very known study from the Pew Research Center, 2018, this study confirms the Greece and Czechia, Greece in the front and Czechia on the bottom. But a study from Slovenia, from Deslan and Lavrik, they showed that more or less between the same years, there was not an increase, but a decrease of religious affiliation. So the data from ESS and the study from a national study from Slovenia, they disagree. So there is a disagreement here. The next variable, we have attendance, and we can see Poland, the first one, and Finland, Czechia, the last. But we can see here attendance, we're talking about at least once a week. And Poland outstands from the others. So it's very different from the others. And we can see also that the countries with the highest decrease are Poland and Ireland. And there are 4 countries with an increase, Sweden, Belgium, France, and United Kingdom, but mostly Belgium and France. And once again, the studies, the Pew Research Center, it's a good study to compare. They confirmed Poland, Finland, and Czechia, the values, their situation in the front and on the bottom. Next, prior. So once again, we have Greece, Ireland, and Poland, the first. So Orthodox and Catholic. On the bottom, we have Czechia, once again, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Hungary. So we have here Czechia plus the Protestant countries. With the highest decrease, Italy, Poland, Ireland, Greece, and with 2 increase, France and Belgium, but mostly Belgium. And although the Pew Research Center study do not have the same countries on the top, because they have Portugal and Italy, and on the bottom, Switzerland and UK, Czechia and Finland, they have low levels. And in the case of Pew Research Center, the variable was about daily prayer, not weekly prayer. So it's a different one. The index of religiosity with the three variables. So we have this index, it summarizes the three others. And so we have the first, Greece, followed by Poland, Italy, Ireland, Slovenia. So the Orthodox country with Catholic countries. And on the bottom, we have Czechia with Sweden, Netherlands, Norway, Finland. So we have Czechia plus Protestant or mixed countries. Two countries with the highest decrease, Poland and Ireland, and three countries with increase, France, Belgium, and Slovenia, but mostly France. As a conclusion, this is one more thing about this. We can say, looking at these variables, if we had more variables, it would be more consistent, the results. But with these variables, we can say that Catholic Orthodox countries are more religious and Protestants mix are less religious. And these confirm studies already done from, for instance, from the Molteni BLCAT, from it's a recent study. So it confirms this. Finally, as a conclusion, we can say that in terms of the theory of cohort replacement, there is a general decrease in general, but looking at the multi-modernities paradigm, we can say that the most religious are the Orthodox Catholic countries, Greece and Poland on the top, and the least or less religious are Czechia, because Czechia is a different countries from the other Catholic countries, and the Protestant and mixed countries. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jose, for a very interesting presentation. Some really big differences over time there that we can come back to in the Q&A. Quite often in ESS, we see lots of stability over time, and you've really shown us an area where there's been some very, very big changes. So it'd be very interesting to come back to that discussion. Again, please do put your questions into the Q&A. And next we'll move to Daphne Nicolitsas, Assistant Professor of Applied Economics at the University of Crete, who's going to be looking at life satisfaction over time and lost generations. Over to you, Daphne.
Okay, so thanks very much, Rory, for introducing me and for giving me the floor. Thanks also to Stefan Swift for organizing this event, and thanks to all participants for being here. I have been enjoying these events with the opportunity of the 20th year birthday of the ESS, and I hope you continue them into the next year to mark the passage to adulthood of the European Social Survey. So let me start by introducing myself. I'm Daphne Nicolitsas. I'm a labor economist at the Department of Economics of the University of Crete, and my interests lie in wage determination, well-being, health, and education. We usually tend to think that it is sad that years go by, but I suppose there is a silver lining in every cloud, and years going by means more waves of the European Social Survey data. So here we are today with 10 rounds of data. What I'm going to be presenting are some preliminary findings from looking at the first 9 rounds of the European Social Survey. Initially, I thought I would be able to look at all 10 rounds, but as I would like to avoid changes in the composition of the countries participating, I limit myself to 9 rounds, which gives us data for 15 countries in the European area. If the 10th round had been included, I would have to limit my analysis to 7 countries: Belgium, Finland, France, Hungary, Ireland, Slovenia, and the UK. The findings are along the lines that Rory just mentioned, stability. And this seems a bit puzzling to me, and it's these puzzles that I would like to share with you. So what is this presentation about? In broad terms, the presentation has two aims. First, to show the evolution over time in life satisfaction, and to ask whether developments have been similar for all countries and individuals of all generations. And second, to focus on the issue of polarization and to ask whether polarization in life satisfaction has increased or decreased over time, and to show in which countries polarization in life satisfaction is higher. Now, if data on life satisfaction were cardinal, the above tasks would have been relatively straightforward. As data on life satisfaction is ordinal, the tasks are a little bit more complicated. So what's the reason for looking at life satisfaction? We are all aware of the discussion taking place for the need to enhance usual macroeconomic indicators with indicators on the quality of life. GDP growth is not a sufficient indicator to capture the quality of life. Furthermore, there is evidence of a link between well-being and economic performance. Happy staff often makes for satisfied shareholders, according to an FT article referring to a recent Oxford study. So the issue is important. It is interesting to know, however, whether changes in GDP are also reflected in existing measures of life satisfaction. GDP per capita has been on an upward trend from 2002, and a trend which was interrupted by the financial crisis. GDP per capita took a turn south, declined between 2007 and 2009 by 5%, and moved again upwards after that. Are these changes and trends reflected in life satisfaction? This is one of the questions that I would like to answer. An issue which is of concern also for modern societies is that of income inequality. We already saw that in the first two papers presented today. In some, but not in all, developed countries, income inequalities has increased. The graph here uses OECD data to show the Gini coefficient.
Daphne, sorry to interrupt, just to say, we can only still see your introductory slide.
Okay, what can I do about that? Let me stop sharing and try again.
Yeah.
In some, but all, in all developed countries, income inequality has increased. The graph here uses OECD data to show the Gini coefficient for as many years as this is available from the OECD. The data here refer to 11 out of the 15 countries that the analysis on life satisfaction will focus on. And what we see is a decrease in inequality in Ireland, Hungary, Poland, Portugal, an increase in Germany, Netherlands, and Sweden, an increase in Spain up to a point and decline thereafter. The question again is whether these developments in income inequality are reflected in life satisfaction. Now, a further issue which is of concern for 21st century economies is that of economic uncertainty. Economic uncertainty has been on the increase. The data here show the Bloom and Davis European Economic Policy Uncertainty Index. We can see clearly the upward trend. And here the data only go up to 2018. But if we looked at further data, would show you could see that in 2022, the increase in uncertainty, economic policy uncertainty, was even higher. So the main point so far has been that economic and social environments are volatile. And what we would like to know is if these are reflected in life satisfaction measures. Now, furthermore, as the number of rounds has been increasing, it would be interesting to know whether there are generational differences in life satisfaction. So how we're going to do this, we're going to look at trends in life satisfaction over time, look at differences in life satisfaction across both cohorts, and calculate polarization measures of life satisfaction. Now, as already mentioned, I use the ESS data for the 15 countries present in the first 9 rounds, and I do a detailed descriptive analysis of changes over time in life satisfaction together with polarization measures of life satisfaction. Now, so finally, we turn to life satisfaction. The 2 measures I use during the presentation are either the median, like what is used in this table, or the distribution of population by life satisfaction rating. And the reason is that the mean of ordinal data is not invariant to the scale being used. Now, what does this table show? This table shows median life satisfaction over time for the 15 countries that have data in all 9 rounds. And it also shows median life satisfaction for all countries together over time. What I find noticeable from this table is the constancy of the median over time. For 5 countries, Belgium, Switzerland, Finland, Norway, and Sweden, the median life satisfaction is always 8. For France, median life satisfaction is constant at 7. For the remaining countries, there is some variation in median life satisfaction, but not considerably so. The table also shows that cross-country variation in life satisfaction has decreased. If you compare the first column, which refers to round 2002 and 3, to the penultimate column, which refers to 2018 and 2019, you'd see that there is much less variation in the last column compared to the first. Now, within country variation has also decreased over time, as we shall see later from the polarization measures. Now, if we had looked at these figures first, I think we would have expected to see the macroeconomic variations to be less than what we saw. If we look at the cumulative distribution of life satisfaction, just to understand how the decrease in variation comes about, what we can see is that the distribution has become more compressed. So the cumulative distribution of the population across the 11 different life satisfaction ratings shows that there is a decline in the percentage of individuals scoring 6 or lower. This is the first set of numbers you see on the right of the dark blue bullet point. And we see an increase in the number of those declaring the highest level of life satisfaction, as you can see from the fact that the second set of numbers on the right of the penultimate bullet point have been declining. The next piece of evidence I'd like to present relates to changes in life satisfaction across generations. It is possible that individuals who belong to the same generation have lived through certain common events that have made them have a different perspective on life. And unfortunately, while there are now 10 rounds of ESS data, because these cover 20 years, this is not a long enough period for a detailed analysis by cohorts. Nevertheless, I think we can attempt a comparison across the cohorts. We distinguish here 7 cohorts by birth decade. You can see the birth decades in the left side most column of the table. So the first cohort includes individuals born between 1900 and 1940. And these individuals would be between 62 and 102 years of age in 2002. There would be between 64 and 104 years of age in 2004, etc. Now, the last cohort includes individuals who were born between 1991 and 2000. And these individuals would be between 20 and 29 years of age in the last wave. Now, the table is to be read going down the columns. So as we move southwards in each column, we are comparing individuals of the same age, but born in more recent years. And what the percentages in the table show are the percentages of individuals scoring below 5 in the 0 to 10 scale of life satisfaction. What we see is that this percentage decreases by decade of birth. The same picture emerges if we look at the percentage of individuals scoring above 6 in the 0 to 10 scale for life satisfaction. Younger generations are more satisfied with their lives. So here we see the percentages going up. Now, let me turn next to polarization measures. I will not go into technicalities here. There are various polarization measures. The most popular ones, I think, are the ones mentioned on the slide. The Allison-Foster index, which is calculated as the difference in the average rating of those who select a rating above and below the median. The ANI, as they are known, indices, which present a weighted difference between the cumulative percentage of individuals below and above the median, and the Apuri index, which shows the dispersion of variable compared to the maximal possible dispersion. In what follows, I only present the Allison-Foster index. The other measures have been calculated and they go in the same direction as the Allison-Foster index. Oops. Okay, so what we see here is that there is a decrease in polarization over time, taking into account all countries together and all rounds. Okay, so in each round, polarization falls continuously until we reach the 9th round. Now, if we want to digress a little bit from time series to a cross-sectional perspective to see whether polarization is higher, we compare here polarization measures in the countries that have the same median in the distribution of life satisfaction, just in the 9th round. The results show that polarization is lowest in the Netherlands and highest in Great Britain. So what can we conclude from all this? Life satisfaction appears to be improving over time and across generations. Macroeconomic developments are much more volatile than life satisfaction. Polarization in life satisfaction within countries appears to be decreasing. Polarization in life satisfaction across countries appears to be on the decline. Now, the next stage in this analysis would be to look at the contributing factors to these changes in life satisfaction over time. And also, I would also like to throw here in the idea of asking individuals themselves about their changes in life satisfaction. Perhaps if individuals were asked in the ESS whether their subjective rating of life satisfaction has changed over time, and what has been the main contributor to this change, this would give us more help in understanding the determinants of life satisfaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daphne. That was absolutely fascinating. I'm sure there'll be some questions. So again, please do put those in the Q&A. And now we'll move on to our final presentation of the day from Bruno Arpino, who's Professor, Department of Statistics, at the University of Padua in Italy. He's going to talk about heterogeneities in the age digital divide, a machine learning approach. Bruno, over to you.
Thank you for inviting me to give this talk to this very interesting event. Let me share the screen. Okay, this talk is about digital divide, in particular differences in internet use by age, so what I call age digital divide. I think that I can be very brief on the motivation. So why it's important to understand whether there is an age digital divide, because the internet is increasingly important for people of all ages. And older people are increasingly using the internet, but still we observe a quite strong digital divide. The point of this paper is how we measure and how we analyze the digital divide by age. So this is very much an empirical and exploratory descriptive study. in which I ask the question, how do we describe the digital divide in internet use across different ages? So typically categorizations are used, like very rough dichotomizations, using thresholds like the typical 65 versus younger ages. And we take the difference in percentage of internet use in these two groups. However, the question here is whether there are better ways of capturing internet use across different ages. And the second point of this paper is to examine intersections between the age digital divide with digital divides across other dimensions like gender, country, education, time. These are the dimensions that I'm considering for this presentation for the time being. However, other dimensions like rurality, occupation, present and past, etc., can be also added. I think that machine learning techniques can be very useful here because these are basically algorithms that don't impose a priori a parameterization on the age distribution. So first of all, we can explore the data to see whether some categorization of the age distribution comes out. And the second point is to use this technique in order to examine complex interactions between age and other variables. The focus of this presentation is on first order age digital divide. So I will focus, as you will see, on whether individuals use or not the internet, also for data limitations, but this approach can be used also for more refined definitions of digital divide. Of course, I use European Social Survey data, and these data have several advantages compared to other sources of data on internet use. First of all, a wide age range. As you know, the ESS covers all individuals aged 15 plus. Other surveys start at older ages, like Share at 50. Other surveys stop earlier at 75. So in this way, we can cover the whole, more or less the whole age range. We have cross-national data, time series. In this analysis, I'm using the core module, information from the core modules from round 1 to 5 and 8 to 10. I cannot use round 6 and 7 because we do not have information on internet use in these two rounds. And I'm using 15 countries that are included in all the rounds that I consider. As I already mentioned, these are the variables that I'm focusing on for the moment, at least. So the main predictor is age. And then I also explore interactions between age and other predictors of internet use. So the question on internet use has changed slightly after round 5. So in the first round, it was a bit more detailed, and we have the possibility to distinguish no access to the internet from no use. From round 8 to 10, we can only identify those individuals that never use the internet. So in order to make these rounds comparable, the first category that I create is never use. And at the extreme, I also have another category that we can compare, daily use of the internet, that is present in all rounds. The other categories about the frequency of use are slightly different. So I group all of them in the category not daily use. However, as you will see, in most of the analysis, I will just focus on whether individuals use or not the internet at all. So I will start with some descriptives that I think are already quite illustrative of the complexity of the topic of how we measure and examine age digital divide. So I start with a very simple graph where you can see the percentage of internet use, never not daily, by age groups. And here I arbitrarily categorize age in some groups, more or less by decade. And this is the pooled sample of all countries, all rounds. And as you can see, there is a quite strong digital divide. For example, if you focus on the green bar, which is never used of the internet, among the youngest individual, we have 12%. In the oldest 80 plus, we have 81% of individuals that never used the internet. Of course, this age digital divide has changed over time. And here I just pick 4 rounds, the first 2 and the last 2. I don't want to go into the detail, but if you focus again on the green bar, you can see that this has decreased very much for all ages. So all ages have decreased the percentage of non-users. However, if you look at the last round, 2021, 2022, there is still a quite big divide, a difference across age groups. How do we quantify this age digital divide? So typically, as I already mentioned, we consider 2 groups, like for example, in this graph, 60 plus versus younger individuals. And here you have the percentage of internet users over time. We can see that in the first round of the ESS, there was a quite big gap, 42 percentage points. And this has reduced over time, going down to 21 percentage points. So both in absolute and relative terms, the age digital divide, if you consider this rough dichotomization of age, has reduced quite a lot. However, as you will see, within both groups, especially the 60 plus, there is a quite high heterogeneity that in this simple way we are not capturing. And as I also mentioned, the age digital divide also intersects with other divides, for example, by gender. Here, I plot the percentage of internet users, distinguishing also daily and not daily use by gender. This is pooling all countries, all waves by age groups. And if you compare, for example, the 2 extreme groups, 80 plus and the individuals younger than 30, you can see that the age digital divide is particularly, so it's strong for both males and females, but it's slightly stronger for females, 73 versus 61 percentage points. I'm not going into the details of this graph, very crowded. However, these plots the same, but for the first 2 rounds and the last 2 rounds. And the only thing I want to point to you is that the gender digital divide is basically eliminated in the last rounds for the younger people. So for people younger than 50, basically there is no digital divide because basically almost all of them are using the internet. However, if you look at the 80 plus, there is still quite a big digital divide. And actually, in absolute terms, at least, this gender digital divide has increased for older people. And this is the age digital divide by countries. We can look at these in several ways, but here I'm just picking the first round, and in the next slide, I'm showing the same for the last round. So this is the percentage of internet users for the age range 60 plus and the younger for each of the 15 countries that we have that I'm considering in this analysis. The countries are ordered by the percentage of internet use in general. And you can see on the left, we have Hungary, Poland, Spain, where the age digital divide is quite big because basically the orange bar, so the 60 plus percentage of internet use is very small. So the maximum, however, the age digital divide actually is smaller than what we observe in other countries, because in other countries we have a quite big percentage of internet users among the individuals younger than 60. So the age digital divide by country ranges from 24 to 58 percentage points in the first round of the ESS. When we look at the last round, so the most recent data, of course, all the bars are higher. The percentage of internet users increased everywhere for both age ranges, and the green bars are mostly very similar. So the percentage of internet users younger than among individuals younger than 60 is above 90% in all countries. What differentiates mostly the countries is the orange bar, so the internet use among 60 plus. And you can see that the age digital divide has mostly reduced or disappeared in Nordic countries, the Netherlands, but is quite big, and actually it's much bigger than before in some Mediterranean countries, Hungary, and other Eastern European countries. So again, age and this case country are interacting. And now the turn of education. So this is the age digital divide by 3 groups of education. In the first round of the ESS, you can see that the blue bars are for the high educated individuals and are always much higher than for the other education groups. And what is very interesting is that if you compare within an age group the bars, there is always an educational gradient. So the higher is the education, the higher is the percentage of internet use. And if you focus on the 80 plus and 70 plus, basically in the first round, for low and medium educated individuals, the percentage of internet users were very small, 2, 3, 4%. While for high educated individuals in the 70 or older, the percentage of internet users were much higher, were substantial. What happened in the last years, 2021, 2022? Again, all bars go up. And if you look at individuals in their 30s or younger, basically there is no much divide by education. Still, for low educated, the percentage of internet use is a bit lower. But this educational gradient is quite big still for individuals from age 50 onwards. And if you look at the 80 plus, there is still quite a big digital divide by education. So age and education are interacting quite strongly in this descriptive, at least. So now the core of this paper, I didn't mention that this is an ongoing study. So this is not published or not a working paper as other paper presented earlier. So all comments are especially welcome. So what I'm using here for the moment is a very simple machine learning technique that is called recursive partitioning, for those who are not familiar with it. Maybe looking at the outcome clarifies what the algorithm does. So the algorithm is called recursive partitioning because it's basically an iterative algorithm that repeatedly partition the sample with the goal of increasing the accuracy of the prediction of the outcome. And the outcome in this case is use of the internet, actually non-use of the internet versus use of the internet. So we start with all individuals in one group, and then we start splitting these in 2 subgroups using one of the variables that we have as predictors and one of the values of this variable. So the first variable, as you can see in this graph, is age. And this means that age is an important variable in predicting use of the internet. So basically, the first split that the algorithm considers is whether individuals are younger than 61 or not. So basically, the algorithm confirms that this dichotomization actually is a rough dichotomization, but it's meaningful because distinguishes two very different groups in terms of internet use. But then the algorithm goes continuous, splitting the sample. So for example, in the right branch, we have individuals older than 61. And the second split is based on the ESS round. So basically we have whether the ESS round is the 7th, well, actually the 7th is missing. So it's the 8th, the 9th, or the 10th versus all the previous rounds. And the third split is based on education. So whether education is medium or high versus low education. So basically, this is telling us that these variables are important in distinguishing individuals in terms of use of the internet. At the end, we have some groups of individuals. For example, this group of individuals here is characterized by having an age of 61 or older, being in one of the early rounds, and having low education. So in this subgroup of the population, which is 10% of the initial sample, the percentage of non-use of the internet is 25%. And you can see that in other subsamples, the percentage of internet non-use is much bigger, 68%. Sorry, the first subgroup is for individual with medium-high education, and the other one where the percentage of internet non-use is much higher, 68%, is for the rest, so individuals with low education. Well, age appears also here in another split in a different part of the tree. And here, the algorithm splits the remaining node according to whether the age is smaller than 25 or not. So basically, in this tree, we just have 3 age groups: smaller than 25, then between 25 and 60, and older. However, this is a very simple tree where I use the default parameters of the algorithm, and the accuracy can be improved. So what I did is to grow the full tree. So I continued splitting until it was not meaningful, basically, to continue splitting. And then I pruned some of the non-important splits. So the accuracy, as you can see, increased to 83%. However, this graph is very crowded. This tree is characterized by many splits, and it's very difficult to read this tree. So we can simplify a bit this tree, and actually we can optimize the algorithm. So I'm showing here a sort of intermediate tree between the very first simple tree and the fully grown tree. Still is very difficult to read this tree very quickly. However, what I want to show you is that age appears in this tree several times. So in the first split, but then, for example, you can see here, there is another split based on age, whether age is smaller or not than 71. Then age appears here, for example, and again, whether age is smaller than 84 or not, 79, 25, 26, 45, etc. So basically, this is telling us that the algorithm is finding several cutoff of age that are important to be considered. We can make these three meaningful in several ways. For example, first of all, we can summarize the importance of each variable by calculating what is called the variable importance. And here it's plotted in terms of relative terms. So the most important variable in predicting internet use is age. And then all the other variables, the importance of all the other variables is measured in relative terms. So for example, we have the second important variable is the round. Then we have education and country. Country accounts for, let's say, 25% of the importance of age. And you can see that female does not appear. Basically, it's not very important in predicting internet use once you have accounted for age, education, etc. But we can also plot the predicted probability of internet non-use by one of the variables that we use in the prediction, for example, age, which is the most important, and also in combination with other variables. So here I plot on the vertical axis the probability of not using the internet by age. And as you can see, the biggest jump in the probability of not using the internet is at 60. And these correspond to what we see here. The first most important split is at that value. But in the two groups that remained, on the left and on the right of 60, we have other splits. For example, we have a split at about 70, at about 80, and also these splits are important because they differentiate more in a more refined way the distribution of internet use by age. Then what I did is to plot the predicted probability of internet non-use by crossing two variables, but interacting basically two variables. Here I interact age and round. Yellow means that we have the highest predicted probability of internet non-use, and this is for the individuals oldest than 70 in the first rounds of the ESS. On the other hand, we have very low predicted probabilities for young individuals, especially in recent years. So what we can see here, and this mirrors what we have seen in the descriptives, is that, again, we have some, the algorithm suggests some categorization of age at 60, at 70, and this has become even more, let's say, refined in the last waves, although the differences in the values has decreased. But still, in the last three rounds, we have that we see that the algorithm for the 60 plus suggests 4 or 5 groups, while for the individuals younger than 60, this is very, very homogeneous. This is a more homogeneous group. Then I examine the interactions of age and gender, and you can see that basically there is no interaction. So gender, as confirmed also by the variable importance, is not that relevant per se, and the age digital divide has very similar patterns. This is by education, and you can see that the shape is relatively similar, is very similar. So there is always a cutoff at 60. However, for some education subgroups, medium and high, the algorithm suggests more splits. And for the low educated, we have only a split at 70, but these jumps are bigger than for the other groups. So the age digital divide is confirmed to interact with education. And finally, this is for country. So this is the plot of predicted probability of internet non-use by age and for each of the 15 countries. The 60 cutoff is always there. what differentiates each country is the heterogeneity within individuals aged 60 plus and 60 and less than 60. Here, I just picked two examples. Poland, where basically these individuals younger than 60 are very homogeneous, and this is the case also in many other, but not all countries. And we have some high homogeneity also for individuals older than 60. So we just have one important split after age 60. On the other hand, we have countries like Netherlands, where you can see that the distribution is much more segmented. So within both groups, especially the 60 plus, the algorithm suggests several splits. So in this case, we should consider not just the 60 plus versus younger individuals, but more refined distinction by age groups. So as I already mentioned, this is a very much an ongoing study. So I don't have, let's say, conclusions for strong conclusions, but what I think this analysis already suggests is that quantifying the age digital divide is something more complex than it may appear. And there are substantial heterogeneities that are kind of masked if we dichotomize age using thresholds like 60 plus or 65 plus or others. So when we analyze the age digital divide, we should take this into account, and machine learning can be one possibility to avoid a priori categorization that might be arbitrary, and we can use categorization that arise from the data. And another very important point is that there are substantial heterogeneities in the age digital divide by education and by country, and also clearly over time, while it seems that age and gender don't interact significantly. In future studies, I will try to use also more advanced machine learning techniques, because this is based on just one tree. There are alternative approaches. We can discuss about that. And I will also consider using the 10th round only for more refined analysis of digital divide, because in this round, in a special model, there are more information on skills, so we can explore higher order digital divides. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bruno. Fascinating paper, again, an area we've seen massive change, I guess, over the 20 years of ESS, the digital divide, and a very innovative approach. So hopefully there'll be some questions. If you do have questions for any of the presenters, there's still time to put them in the Q&A. First of all, there is a question for Ivan. So going back to the first paper first on support for income redistribution in Europe. And question here is whether there is any, you've looked at all at whether redistribution policies themselves in the different countries changed over time, the analysis that you were looking at. Is that something you've looked at, Ivan?
Yes, in the appendix of the article, we have as a proxy indicator public social spending as a proportion of GDP. We have it both by the individual countries, grouped by welfare regimes, and also as the aggregates for welfare regimes. There are indeed variations, both within countries and across regimes. I would say, when looking at this graph, that the liberal welfare regime and the Mediterranean welfare regimes, they will increase their public social spending following the Great Recession. In other words, as those means tested, benefits increased. So, and at the same time, the GDP decreased because of the recession. So it jumped, but then approximately around 2014, it just came to the original levels. The other welfare regimes are relatively stable, and what this actually suggests is what I have already said in the presentation, that the social democratic welfare regime has on average highest welfare state, where the average public social spending as a percentage of GDP is the highest, around 27% on average. And it's lowest within the post-communist and liberal regimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to say that Ivan has put a link in the chat part of this to the paper that they produced on in POQ. So congratulations to you for that. And if anyone wants to look at the paper, they can find the link there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving to Kristýna on the paper on contextual effects of unemployment on redistribution in Europe. A couple of questions here, one of which was first of all from Georg Kessler asking about some of the significance tests and whether you've done those, because some of them looked rather small. Is that something you've looked at, Kristýna?
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's always difficult, to estimate specifically whether the effect is, big or small. But just to mind you, this is multi-level model. So these interaction effects where you have the 0.0 something are on 27 countries. So the N is actually quite small. So usually the effects would be in this, 0.0 area. But we think that the effects are not as small because, with the only 27 countries, we think that they're actually quite important, which you can also see in the AIC and BIC tests. But we can definitely calculate effect size estimates to, ensure that the tests are actually robust and the conclusions as well.
Thank you. Another question for you is about the unemployment measure that you use as the contextual variable. Is that something that you think was calculated consistently between countries, or could there have been some differences in that background variable?
Yeah, so we used the variable from the OECD, so that should be consistent across countries and time.
Yes, it's the harmonized unemployment rate, which should allow for cross-country comparison of unemployment rates. In other words, the definition of unemployment is the same across all countries.
Excellent. We love that. Thank you very much. A question for Jose next on the paper on youth religiosity and religiosity in Europe over time. A question from Isabella. She says, sorry, my questions are on differences of attitudes according to age, difference of manifestations of religiosity between Catholic and Protestant.
Yes, I asked her, and I think the only question that I can this presentation was not about not comparing ages, not comparing age groups. Generally, is to compare young people over time between 2002 and 2020. What I can reply to be rigorous, what I can reply in terms of why the French have this increase, and looking at I can say that looking at difference between 2002 2020, probably the difference is because there is an increase of Muslim percentage of young people in this 18 years, and so these young Muslims, they probably they pray and they attend more than the average, and so there is an increase because of this, probably. most probably because of this.
Was that increase in France, was that significant? Would you say it was statistically significant?
I would to be rigorous. I would need to check the data. I cannot reply now about this because I do not have the data to make a comparison. Yeah.
But interesting that you think it's to do with the Muslim religion, not the Christian religion. So
a first explanation can be because of this. Can be.
And just also a question of definition. For example, you classified Ireland as Catholic, with less than 10% of people there going to religious services. At what stage is it no longer classified as a Catholic country?
When you talk about Catholic country, you're talking about countries or Protestant or Orthodox or Muslim that have specific religious tradition. In case of Catholic, because you talk about Ireland, right?
Yeah.
Because Ireland is no doubt about this. It's a country with a Catholic tradition.
Yeah.
I
guess my question is when is the tradition classed as being over? When you've seen such a catastrophic decline in attendance?
You can say that Czech is a Catholic. It's a country with a Catholic tradition, and as you know, I think I showed that. It's the least religious or the most secular country in Europe, no doubt about that. But it is a country with Catholic tradition. Although there was since at least mostly from the 19th century an anti-Catholic tradition or the anti-Habsburg monarchy, they are a Catholic tradition country.
Okay.
And I think you cannot say that in 20 or 30 years a country would not be a Catholic or Protestant country, because they have a tradition for so many centuries.
So it's kind of a century change would be needed before you declassify it, essentially. Yeah. It's a long process.
I think perhaps it's too soon to change this. This it's a question of classification. I think to try to study these countries, we classify them, and we classify them in terms of a religious tradition. For instance, you have Netherlands or Germany or Switzerland, they have a mixed tradition, Catholic and Protestant. But I think you classify like this. You cannot change now. This, I think you cannot change now.
Thank you, Jose. And also a question for Daphne. Was it with the measures there that you're looking at in terms of well-being? There's been a lot of talk recently about increases in sort of the mental health crisis, etc., but doesn't seem to be coming through in this well-being data. Do you have views on why that might be? Are these really the right measures for well-being that we've used in our surveys?
Well, yeah, this is one question, whether this is the right measure, but I think perhaps the difference will be seen in the next round. So if I had used round 10, if you could capture the pandemic, because it's the pandemic and after, where you can see the mental health seriously deteriorating, that would show a change. So to me, given this information, which I haven't looked at, but having looked at what is reported in the press and other studies on mental health, it would mean that you need a major event like a pandemic, which brings everything upside down, to change these measures of life satisfaction. But I am a bit skeptical also about the measure and how much more can life satisfaction improve. Will it go to 10? It can't go any further for Norway and Sweden. And so it seems to me that this 0 to 10 scale might have its limits.
So it's an interesting moment. One of the things we're looking at course, in the near-term future in ESS, we'll be changing our data collection methodology in 2027 when we're moving away from face-to-face to self-completion surveys. And there is evidence there that you do actually get somewhat lower self-reporting in self-completion surveys. That will be something to look out for. Thank you. I think there was someone who asked if they could ask a question. If they could please pop it into the chat or write it in the Q&A, then we can.
Okay, that was me actually. Rory.
Oh, it's you. Oh, please.
We can't go into the Q&A, but I could put it in the chat. But
oh no, please ask it here, please.
Yeah, I was thinking actually whether this attendance to church has to do with, and the changes in it has to do with the Sunday openings of shops. And I would find that interesting to know whether, the Sunday openings has affected the church attendance.
Are you asking this to me, right?
Please.
Okay, you are making difficult questions. I will try to answer. Sometimes we do not have the problem here. Sometimes we do not have enough studies or data that we can use to answer this kind of questions, for instance, or I needed to check more information about this. It is what I can say. I think it's a very good question from you. It's a good hypothesis. So it's you saying that the connection, the linkage between attendance and shopping. It can, but it's a general phenomenon. It's a secularization. It's a broader phenomenon process. And it includes many variables, and so not only one is important, more than one are important to explain. And as I explained in my presentation, we have multiple modernities, and each country has its case. So it depends from country to country. It varies from country to country. But yes, it's an hypothesis. It's a possible explanation. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of the presenters today for a wonderful set of presentations. It's fascinating to see all the different uses of ESS data. I think definitely you made the point about it's been nice to have these online seminars, and we will be planning to continue them into the future, but also look out for some very exciting news in the next couple of weeks about an in-person ESS conference in 2024, where we can all get together, maybe in person, and share our papers. Thanks again to everyone. A particular thanks to Stefan Swift for all of his work putting the seminars together, and have a lovely day. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.